Welcome to Chicago, 1897, where the colossal fortunes of the few are built upon the desperate silence of the many. Meet Jedidiah Shaw, the ruthless tycoon whose immense wealth cannot purchase peace, and Susanna Croft, the humble laundress whose only treasure is her unshakable dignity. Their worlds were never meant to collide, yet fate is cruel. When $8, the price of one woman's humiliation, catches the cold eye of the other, a perilous contract is forged. A vast, echoing mansion becomes the stage for a dangerous game of class and forbidden desire. One touch could shatter the tycoon's fragile empire. One honest glance could expose a dark secret he'd kill to keep buried. Will Jedidiah choose the sterile safety of society, or risk everything for the inconvenient truth of a woman who owns nothing but her soul? Prepare yourself for a journey of passion, scandal, and redemption. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from. And what is your favorite theme in a Gilded Age romance? Duty or desire? Chicago, 1897. The city was a beast of steel and slaughter, its wealth built on the backs of men and the tireless roar of industry. Nowhere was this contrast sharper than in the offices of Jedidiah Shaw. The tycoon sat at a desk carved from dark mahogany, overseeing an empire of meatpacking that spanned the nation. At 38, Jedidiah was less a man than an instrument of commerce, sharp, efficient, and cold. The silk lining of his charcoal suit felt alien against his skin, a constant reminder of the hard-won distance between the grime of the stockyards and the gilded cage of his power. He was a widower, and his grand mansion felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum for his own heart. The silence was absolute, broken only by the scratch of his pen on crisp ledgers. He required a wife, a respectable wife, to secure his market position, but the prospect was as dreary as a winter fog. He left the office in his private carriage, the air inside sterile and quiet. As the carriage rolled from the wealthy downtown district toward a meeting concerning railroad acquisitions, the tycoon glanced out the window, a habit born of a lifetime spent watching for weakness in the market. It was in the grimy, crowded street near the city's growing tenement district that the sight arrested him. A young woman stood against the harsh brick of a pawnbroker's shop, her back ramrod straight. She was small, but held herself with a fierce, weary pride. Her hair, the color of damp cinnamon, was pulled back severely, and her hands, chapped and reddened from steam and lye, were clenched at her sides. She wore a simple, dark skirt and a clean but faded cotton apron, the uniform of the working class. Facing her was a large, brutish man, a collector, easily identifiable by his smug, predatory swagger.
You owe me, and I always collect, and I always collect.
The collector bellowed, drawing the eyes of passing laborers, or I'd take the goods and your good name with them. The humiliation was palpable. Jedidiah felt a twist in his gut, a visceral reaction he hadn't experienced since his own mother had been driven to tears over a handful of coins. I told you, Mr. Finch, the woman, Susanna Croft, replied, her voice low but clear, holding a tremor of desperation. I need the money for my rent, and the work was delayed. I can give you 5 now, and the rest next week. I beg you. The collector sneered, seizing the small, hand-stitched reticule she offered. He roughly counted the coins, then flung the bag back at her, scattering the precious few cents into the mud. 5 is not 8. You save for a week, and all you scratch together is $5. You're a beggar, Mrs. Croft, and your virtue is likely as thin as your coin purse. Susanna's composure finally broke. She did not weep, but the look she cast the collector was one of utter, annihilating contempt, a moral condemnation that held more power than any threat of violence. She sank to her knees, not from weakness, but to meticulously gather the few coppers from the mud, determined to retrieve every last piece of her dignity. Jedidiah did not hesitate. He rapped sharply on the carriage roof. "Stop here! Find out her debt." "Pay it, pay all of it," he commanded his aide, his voice rough. He watched as his man discreetly intervened. The collector quickly accepted the full amount, retreating like the rat he was. Jedidiah's carriage was now just a block from the scene, concealed by the afternoon traffic, but he remained. He saw Susanna rise, her clothes soiled, but her head held high. She knew a mysterious benefactor had saved her, but she did not look grateful. She looked furious. A few hours later, Jedidiah's aide reported back, "Her name is Mrs. Susanna Croft, sir, a laundress, and when I offered her additional funds from the account, she refused, said she would not take charity, only what she earns." The Tycoon's lips twitched. A laundress who valued her honor more than his fortune. A woman whose small life possessed a dignity his vast empire lacked. Jedidiah knew, with a sudden electrifying certainty, that he could not let her go. She was a problem, an intriguing, necessary problem that his wealth could not simply solve. "Have a contract drawn up," Jedidiah ordered, his grey eyes alight with a calculating intensity that had nothing to do with railroads. "She is no longer to be a laundress. She is to be brought to the mansion tomorrow. We shall call her a domestic consultant. I require her efficiency and her practical logic to organize this household staff." He pushed his ledgers aside. The business of steel and shipping could wait. The business of an $8 debt and the spirited woman who fiercely defended it had unexpectedly, perilously begun. The Shaw Mansion, a fortress of limestone and ambition on Chicago's Gold Coast, was the antithesis of Susanna Croft's world, where her tiny dwelling knew the honest heat of the laundry stove and the clean steam of honest labor. Jedidiah Shaw's house knew only polished marble, stifling stillness, and the chill of untouched money. Susanna arrived on the following afternoon, her meager luggage, a valise holding 2 changes of clothes and her sewing kit, feeling impossibly heavy. She wore her best, if faded, dark skirt and a freshly laundered blouse. The carriage that conveyed her felt like a gilded cage, and the formality of the staff who received her, a phalanx of silent, starched disdain, was more intimidating than the roughest debt collector. The head of this silent army was Mr. Ainsworth, the butler, a man whose spine was straighter than any pillar in the foyer. Ainsworth's eyes, thin and critical, swept over Susanna's simple attire and her slightly roughened hands. He did not conceal his immediate judgment. This was a pretense, a passing fancy of the master's, and beneath his contempt. "Mrs. Croft," Ainsworth pronounced, his voice dripping with condescension, "you are assigned the quarters designated for the senior housekeepers. Mr. Shaw's instructions were unorthodox. You are to assume the role of domestic consultant and shall report directly to me regarding the management of the staff." Susanna met his gaze, her chin lifting. "Thank you, Mr. Ainsworth. I assure you, my understanding of efficiency is not limited to laundry. I shall commence my duties immediately by requesting a full inventory of the pantry stores and a revised schedule for the kitchen staff." She spoke with a clear, unwavering authority that belied her age and position, a defense honed by years of surviving on her wits. Ainsworth recoiled slightly, not expecting such direct business-like competence. "Very well, Mrs. Croft. You will find that the Shaw household is not run like a common enterprise, however. We maintain standards." The atmosphere in the mansion quickly turned frigid, a battlefield of class and competence. Susanna's assignment was a direct threat to the established order. She discovered a household rife with waste. Silver was polished daily, regardless of use. Food was discarded at the slightest imperfection, and staff members, comfortable in the shadow of their master's preoccupation with industry, often worked with an alarming lack of commitment. Susanna's first report to Jedidiah was a masterpiece of objective efficiency. She did not complain about Ainsworth's attitude or the maid's resentments. She simply presented the facts. "Mr. Shaw," she stated, standing before his desk where he reviewed a dizzying chart of railroad stock, "your household spends nearly a third more on linens than necessary. The parlour maids are instructed to change the drapes monthly, which accelerates wear. I have proposed a quarterly schedule, saving you $200 this month alone. Furthermore, the kitchen is discarding quality meat scraps that could be utilized for staff meals, lowering your payroll's food allowance. Jedidiah, leaning back in his chair, stared at the precise figures, not at the woman. He had expected sentiment or complaint. He received cold, hard economics. It was a language he understood perfectly. $200, he murmured, a hint of grudging approval in his voice. You view my household as a factory, Mrs. Croft, and you are right. Your methods are efficient. Their subsequent interactions fell into a tense, formal routine. Jedidiah would summon her, never looking directly at her, and receive her reports on his schedule. He would occasionally challenge a figure, testing her, only to find her calculations impeccable. Yet in those brief, charged meetings, a subtle, unspoken current began to flow. Susanna, in her new proximity to the Tycoon, observed the man behind the myth. She noticed the way he pinched the bridge of his nose when faced with some complicated document, the sheer, unrelenting pressure that lined his mouth. He was perpetually preoccupied, carrying the weight of his empire like a physical burden. She realized his vast wealth offered him no freedom, only a different kind of servitude. One afternoon, Susanna was in the library, organizing the dusty, neglected domestic accounts, when she accidentally knocked a stack of financial journals. She bent down quickly, her cheek flushing, only to find Jedidiah's large hand reaching for the same stack. Their fingers brushed. The contact was fleeting, less than a second, yet it ignited a shock that traveled through Susanna like a flame. His hand was warm, heavy and rough, speaking of hidden strength and decisive action. Her own hand, despite its calluses, felt fragile beneath his. She gasped, pulling back as if burned. Jedidiah froze. His grey eyes finally lifted from the journals, meeting hers. In that single, drawn-out moment, the sterile air of the mansion vanished. The professional distance, the social chasm, the difference between Tycoon and laundress, all dissolved into a volatile, shared awareness. His gaze was intense, analytical, and for a terrifying instant, purely masculine and predatory. He was assessing her, not as a manager, but as a woman. He quickly retrieved the journals, his jaw tightening. My apologies, Mrs. Croft. Distracted. No, sir, my carelessness, Susanna stammered, recovering her composure through sheer force of will. She instantly returned to her work, her heart hammering against her ribs. The brief, reckless touch had revealed a deep, unsettling truth. Beneath the calculations and the contempt, there was a profound physical tension between them, a dangerous recognition of one another's presence. Meanwhile, the external world was closing in. Elias Van Dorn, an older man of established fortune and vicious pride, increased his subtle campaign against Jedidiah. Van Dorn viewed the meatpacking baron as a vulgar upstart and a threat to Chicago's more refined social structure. Jedidiah met with his chief legal counsel that evening, the discussion focusing on an imminent financial threat from Van Dorn's camp. The merger will fail, Jedidiah, unless you move quickly, the lawyer warned. Van Dorn is using your nouveau riche reputation against you. You must secure a respectable match. A wife of suitable social pedigree will silence his criticisms instantly. Jedidiah nodded, his mind elsewhere. He was thinking of the $200 Susanna had saved him and the fierce, defiant light in her eyes. "Find me a wife, then," he said, his voice clipped and empty of passion, "one that will please the public. Leave the private affairs to me." But the private affairs were already compromised. Ainsworth, the butler, had been quietly cultivating a friendship with Van Dorn's trusted chauffeur. The snobbish butler harbored a festering resentment against Susanna, viewing her intrusion as a grave insult to his professional dignity. During a discreet meeting at a downtown saloon, Ainsworth, fueled by too much expensive whiskey and an inflated sense of self-importance, confirmed the rumors to the chauffeur. "She is a nobody, Mr. Thompson. A laundress! The master found her in the gutters and brought her here under this ridiculous pretense. He calls her a consultant, but she is merely a woman of humble origin he keeps to amuse himself before he finally marries a proper lady. Ainsworth believed he was protecting the social order. In reality, he was delivering a loaded weapon into the hands of Jedidiah's fiercest enemy. Susanna felt the mounting hostility. She knew her time in the mansion was finite. Every interaction, every glance from Jedidiah, every whispered slight from the servants only reinforced the colossal class chasm she could never truly cross. She watched Jedidiah, this powerful, lonely man, realizing he was already searching for a woman of high pedigree. She was a temporary necessity, a brief, curious distraction. The realization was a sharp, cold pain that settled deep within her chest. The small, impossible hope that had flared in the library, sparked by the brief, dangerous touch of his hand, was instantly extinguished. She renewed her focus on her work, pouring her pain into the ledgers, determined to leave the mansion with her pride and her sanity intact. She would not be humiliated again, not for $8, and certainly not for the price of a tycoon's passing fancy. The distance was safe. The distance was necessary. The opulent silence of the Shaw mansion was only truly broken by the relentless sound of the Chicago weather. A sudden, violent thunderstorm that descended upon the city one late evening, shaking the immense glass panes of the drawing-room windows. The storm caught Jedidiah Shaw entirely by surprise. He had been working in his private study, hours past midnight, immersed in complicated market projections that promised either ruin or unrivaled dominance. He was alone. Ainsworth, the butler, had long since retired the main staff to their quarters. Only the skeleton night crew remained, spread thin across the vast estate. A sudden, sharp crack of thunder plunged the entire house into absolute darkness. Jedidiah rose immediately, not in panic, but in controlled irritation. He was accustomed to command, and the unexpected helplessness was an insult. He fumbled for a lamp, his powerful hands clumsy with the delicate mechanism. A soft, clear voice sliced through the darkness, startling him. "The main gas valves are located behind the staircase panel, sir. The night watchman usually relights the pilot from the service basement, but he may be delayed due to the rain." It was Susanna Croft. She had been quietly working in the small adjacent library, reviewing the household expenditure ledgers. Even in the inky blackness, her presence was precise and capable. "Mrs. Croft," Jedidiah acknowledged, his voice a low rumble. "You are still at work. The accounts required balancing, sir. A few additional hours saved you a day of salary for the bookkeeper," she replied simply, demonstrating her unwavering dedication to efficiency. She moved without hesitation, her movements guided by practical memory rather than sight. "And how are you so acquainted with the gas lines?" he asked, following the faint sound of her footsteps. "My first position was in a hotel basement. We managed the burners for the laundry and the kitchen. The smell of gas teaches one quickly where the pipes run," she explained. Her answer was devoid of self-pity, stated simply as a matter of fact, yet it painted a vivid picture of the hard, unseen work that formed her past. Jedidiah realized he had followed her not to the grand salon, but to the mansion's sprawling, functional kitchen, a place he rarely visited. Susanna, finding a box of sulphur matches near the hearth, quickly lit a few small oil lamps, bathing the cavernous room in a warm, flickering amber light. The formal dining hall adjacent felt cold and dead, but the kitchen, with its copper pots glimmering faintly, suddenly felt intimate. Susanna's attention immediately turned practical. "You missed dinner, sir. I assume the cook left something prepared for you?" "I rarely take dinner when business is pressing," Jedidiah replied dismissively. "It is an unnecessary formality." Susanna paused, her hands resting on the cool marble counter. She turned to face him, the lamplight casting deep shadows under her expressive eyes. "That is not efficiency, Mr. Shaw. That is neglect. A man cannot command an empire if he starves the foundation." He was accustomed to deference. Her direct critique was bracing. He stared at her, caught off guard by her boldness. "Very well, Mrs. Croft. Prove your point." Susanna did not require orders twice. She located a few simple cold cuts, hard cheese and day-old bread, items destined to be discarded by the morning staff. She quickly arranged them on a plain wooden cutting board, heated some water for tea, and set 2 places at the large, worn chef's table in the center of the room. For the first time since his wife's death, Jedidiah Shaw ate a meal that was not a meticulously orchestrated performance. It was humble, immediate, and shared. The forced proximity, the shared vulnerability of the storm, and the intimacy of the kitchen setting dissolved the formal barriers between them. The conversation drifted away from ledgers. "I see the light in the library late most nights," Jedidiah confessed, taking a strong gulp of tea. "What drives you, Mrs. Croft? Your debt is settled. You could take the wage and rest." Susanna looked down at the rough, practical food. "It is not the money I seek, sir, but security, the kind that cannot be taken by a debt collector or a fickle employer. I seek a life built on a foundation of my own making. My husband, he was a good man, but his illness consumed everything. I learned that kindness does not pay bills, and that knowledge is the only currency no one can steal." Her voice was low and quiet, but infused with the powerful weight of genuine sorrow and iron resolution. Jedidiah listened, his gaze fixed on her face, finally seeing beyond the consultant to the woman. He felt a sudden, profound understanding. He, too, had built his life out of desperation, a need to escape the fear of poverty. "My family were not always owners, Mrs. Croft," Jedidiah murmured, his voice lowered almost to a whisper. "We were laborers. My mother scrubbed floors in boarding houses. Every dollar I have now is a shield against the shame of what I once was." He paused, the admission rare and painful. "That is why the sight of that collector, why your humiliation over the $8, it made me physically ill. It was a memory, not an observation." Susanna's sharp eyes softened with profound empathy. She saw the burden of his success, the constant fear of slipping back. "It is a heavy shield, Mr. Shaw," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain beating the windows, "but perhaps too thick. Sometimes a shield separates a man from the warmth he needs." The statement hung in the air, charged with dangerous meaning. He wanted to argue, to deny the need for warmth, yet her intuition was unnervingly accurate. The immense emotional tension in the room was almost unbearable. They finished the food in silence. Jedidiah felt a powerful, reckless urge to reach out and simply touch her hand, to offer comfort or claim connection. But he refrained, constrained by his honor and the massive social gulf that separated a tycoon from a laundress. The moment broke when the electricity flickered, then roared back to life, plunging the kitchen back into stark, harsh reality. "The power is restored," Jedidiah announced, his voice regaining its professional, clipped edge. He rose swiftly, the tycoon persona snapping back into place. "Your counsel was invaluable, Mrs. Croft. Thank you for the meal." Before he could retreat, Susanna spoke again, her voice betraying a quiet tremor of disappointment. "Mr. Shaw," she said, retrieving the ledgers, "I noticed your account books are filled with rough notes detailing a massive early acquisition of land near the rail lines, the very land that formed your capital. The writing is crude like a working man's hand." Jedidiah froze, the blood draining from his face. The casual mention of that specific transaction, the dark secret of his ruthless rise, was a violation, a chilling intrusion into the foundation of his power. "They are old notes," he said, his voice hard as flint. "You are to restrict your focus to the household economy, Mrs. Croft. The business ledgers are not your concern." Susanna met his gaze unflinchingly, though her face was pale. "Of course, sir. I merely noted the discrepancy in the numbers." The exchange left a scar. Jedidiah felt both a desperate protective need for this woman who saw his vulnerability and a sudden sharp fear of the one who might expose his past. The following morning, Jedidiah prepared for his trip east. His carriage was ready. He stood in the great hall, his personal aide waiting. He felt an intense, irrational compulsion to see Susanna one last time. He ordered a package wrapped, a small but exquisitely bound set of financial ledgers with stiff, high-quality covers engraved with the Shaw crest. A truly fine gift, suitable for a professional bookkeeper. He intended it to be a mark of respect for her skill. He handed the box to his aide. "Deliver this to Mrs. Croft with my compliments. It is a reward for her diligence." Jedidiah left for the train station with a sense of unease. He had chosen an expensive, professional gift to avoid sentimentality, but in his attempt to maintain distance, he had achieved the opposite, an utterly impersonal gesture. Susanna received the box in her meager room. She opened it to find the beautiful, cold ledgers. She ran her finger over the elaborate crest. Her eyes filled not with tears of gratitude, but with the cold, bitter realization of his intent, a reward for diligence. A payment, a reminder that her value to him was purely transactional. The touch of his hand the night before had been a fleeting spark, quickly extinguished by the Tycoon's commitment to class, control, and commerce. The small, secret hope in her heart solidified into a bitter conviction. Jedidiah Shaw was determined to buy his way out of poverty, but he would never allow himself to truly love a woman who reminded him of it. The gift was not affection, it was a final, cold definition of her limited place in his life. The pain was acute. She instantly retrieved her resignation letter. The immense distance between them had never felt wider. The silence Jedidiah Shaw left behind was heavier than his physical presence. The mansion, often cold, now felt utterly devoid of warmth, a vast, echoing monument to industry. Susanna Croft faced this emptiness, armed only with her professional pride and the chilling presence of the resignation letter, which lay folded precisely on her small writing desk, a promise of freedom she was not yet ready to enact. His parting gift, the exquisite leather-bound ledgers, sat on her table, a perpetual, silent insult. She forced herself to use them, the rich material a cruel reminder that to Jedidiah her worth was precisely measured in columns of balanced figures. She poured all her hurt into her work, transforming emotional turmoil into relentless mechanical efficiency. She reorganized the linen closets until they resembled military formations and balanced the wine cellar accounts to the very last bottle of claret. Her dedication was flawless, driven by the fierce need to leave the Shaw estate without owing him a single minute of unearned pay. Meanwhile, in the gilded drawing rooms of the city, Elias Van Dorn began his slow, deliberate siege. Having received confirmation of Susanna's true origins from the indiscreet butler Ainsworth, Van Dorn recognized the perfect vector for social sabotage. He did not attack Jedidiah's business directly, but rather his social foundation, the one thing Jedidiah desperately needed to secure his future merger. Van Dorn was a master of the polite slight and the venomous whisper. He began his campaign at an afternoon tea hosted by Mrs. Astor's cousin, injecting the poison with surgical precision. "Poor Mr. Shaw," Van Dorn remarked, casually stirring his tea. "He is so consumed by the markets that he has entirely lost his judgment regarding his household. I hear he has installed some person of unknown background to manage his domestic affairs. A rather unfortunate association for a man seeking to marry into a respected New York line." The implication was clear. Jedidiah was either too tasteless or too desperate to maintain social standards, making him a risky partner. The rumor, like ink dropped into clear water, spread rapidly through the city's intricate social network. Susanna felt the mounting hostility like a physical pressure. She was no longer just the peculiar domestic consultant. She became the subject of pointed, frosty curiosity. When society ladies called at the mansion, seeking to confirm the rumors, they treated Susanna with deliberate condescension. One afternoon, Mrs. Alcott, a formidable matron whose son was a potential business partner for Jedidiah, arrived unannounced. She found Susanna supervising the repotting of the winter ferns. "Mrs. Croft, is it?" Mrs. Alcott asked, her voice high and brittle. "Such an unusual title. You seem to be quite busy with your plantings. I was under the impression Mr. Shaw employed a full-time gardener, as any respectable gentleman would." Susanna straightened slowly, brushing the potting soil from her apron. She met the matron's gaze calmly. "Indeed, madam, Mr. Shaw employs a gardener for the estate grounds. I, however, am ensuring that the indoor plant budget is managed with optimal efficiency and without unnecessary expenditure on replacement specimens. I find that careful supervision is often more effective than mere title." Mrs. Alcott scoffed, but retreated quickly, disarmed by the younger woman's composure and undeniable authority over her domain. The encounter confirmed for the socialite that Susanna was an anomaly, a woman of startling competence, but it did nothing to quiet the scandalous whispers about her lack of pedigree. In the East, Jedidiah was surrounded by the very social structures he sought to conquer. He met with Miss Eleanor Hastings, the impeccably bred daughter of a Boston financier, a woman who represented the perfect, advantageous match. She was beautiful, poised, and utterly conventional. During a dull, formal dinner, Miss Hastings spoke intelligently about European politics and the latest trends in the arts. But Jedidiah felt nothing but a numbing indifference. He found himself thinking of Susanna, not of her face, but of her hands as they balanced his ledgers, hands that knew the honest grit of work. He wondered how she would dissect Miss Hastings' frivolous spending habits. He yearned for the sharp, unforgiving honesty of her critique, a honesty he had foolishly misinterpreted as mere competence. His feelings became a confusion of longing and duty. He knew his future depended on Miss Hastings, yet every polite smile felt like a surrender of his true self. Jedidiah attempted to quell his self-reproach by sending a grand, impersonal gesture back to Chicago. He chose a valuable antique silver tea service, instructing his aide to have it delivered to the mansion with a card simply stating, "For the household's improved efficiency." When the silver arrived, it was a stunning display of wealth, gleaming, ornate, and impossibly heavy. It was delivered with great fanfare by the butler Ainsworth, who took malicious delight in its presentation. "Mrs. Croft," Ainsworth announced with a sickening formality, "the master has sent a gift. Observe the craftsmanship. It is no doubt a compensation for your temporary efforts." Susanna stared at the magnificent service. It was breathtaking, yet it chilled her to the core. It was not a gift for her. It was an object for the house, meant to showcase his wealth. The accompanying card confirmed her deepest fear. She was merely an efficient engine in his vast machine. The subtle, yearning connection they had shared in the lamplit kitchen now seemed like a foolish dream. The gift felt less like a compliment and more like a final cold payment. It was his way of drawing the line in silver and gold. "You belong in the service of my house, not in my heart." The emotional blow was devastating. Susanna retired to her room, her face pale with resolution. The elegant ledgers, the silver tea service, the freezing glances of the society ladies, they all spoke the same truth. Her stay was over. She could not endure another week of this gilded torture, watching him prepare to claim another woman, while she remained the useful, silent phantom in his halls. She retrieved the folded paper from her desk. Her hand did not tremble. She had earned her wage honestly. She had restored order to his chaotic accounts. She had her pride. Susanna dipped her pen in the inkwell and wrote a clean, firm date at the top of her resignation letter. She detailed her accomplishments with precision, expressed her gratitude for the opportunity to serve, and requested immediate release from her duties. "I am not paid in silver, Mr. Shaw. I am paid in honesty, she thought, sealing the envelope with a decisive snap of wax. Her heart was heavy, not with despair, but with the painful necessary recognition that she had to save herself. She was ready to return to her difficult but honest life, determined to escape the mansion before Jedidiah returned and finalized his society marriage. The time for dreaming was over. The time for self-preservation had arrived. She would leave him to his wealth, his prestige, and his loneliness. Jedidiah Shaw returned to Chicago on a private rail car, the speed of the journey matching the frantic pace of his mind. The New York merger was secured. The Boston partnership solidified. He was financially dominant, politically safe, and yet the hollow victory left him cold. Miss Hastings's predictable beauty and her father's dry assurances had only reinforced the absence in his own life. His thoughts, instead of dwelling on dividends, kept returning to a simple, faded apron and a pair of honest, assessing eyes. He entered the mansion in the late afternoon, the house staff snapping instantly to attention. Ainsworth, the butler, glided forward with the practiced ease of a society sentinel. "Welcome home, sir. Your household is in perfect order, thanks to Mrs. Croft's meticulous efforts. She has proven invaluable in matters of expenditure." Ainsworth's praise, though grudging, was meticulously calibrated to sound neutral, masking the relief that Jedidiah's return meant the woman's bizarre tenure must soon end. "Mrs. Croft," Jedidiah repeated, the name tasting sharp and forbidden on his tongue. "Where is she now?" "In her quarters, sir. She submitted her resignation earlier this morning. Her service is concluded." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Concluded. The word struck Jedidiah with the force of a physical blow, igniting a raw, irrational anger. She was leaving. She was abandoning the post, the order, the stability he had engineered for her, simply walking back to the life of hardship he had saved her from. He walked past the butler without a word, his expensive leather boots silent, yet forceful on the marble floor. He climbed the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, his large frame radiating barely suppressed fury. He moved through the formal hallways to the staff wing, a territory he usually avoided. He found the door to her small, tidy room slightly ajar. Susanna was there, her back to him. Her few belongings, the sewing kit, the few books she owned, were packed neatly into her valise. On the simple writing desk lay the resignation letter, folded neatly next to the ornate, despised silver ledgers. "Mrs. Croft!" The sound of his voice was low and powerful, thick with frustration, startling her. Susanna spun around, her face instantly paling. She had hoped to be long gone before his return. She held herself rigid, a warrior bracing for a final defeat. "Mr. Shaw," she managed, her voice steadier than her nerves. "I apologize for the abruptness, but my letter should clarify my decision. My duties are complete, and I request my final wages." He advanced into the room, shutting the door behind him with a quiet thud that echoed with finality. The small room suddenly seemed suffocatingly small, holding the immense, dangerous energy of the 2 people within it. "Complete?" Jedidiah scoffed, his gaze sweeping over the meager valise. "You speak of efficiency, yet you throw away the security you earned. You march straight back to penury, to the very humiliation I saved you from." Susanna flinched, but the insult solidified her resolve. "You did not save me, sir. You purchased me for a time. You saved me from $8 of debt, but you cannot save me from the debt of honor I owe myself. I refuse to be a curious diversion you keep in the back wing while you court your society bride. I have made no commitment. You sent a gift, a silver tea service and an engraved ledger," she countered, pointing a trembling finger at the desk. "A reward for a job well done, Mr. Shaw, not a token of regard. You defined my place with silver and silk. I understood the message clearly. I am a clever employee, nothing more. My pride cannot stomach being treated as a temporary toy." "Pride!" Jedidiah roared, taking another step closer, his hands balling into fists. "It is foolishness. It is sheer romantic feminine lunacy. I offered you permanent stability. I offered you the one thing you desire most, security. You offered me a cage, Mr. Shaw, a gilded one, but a cage nonetheless, she cried, tears of pure, desperate frustration finally springing to her eyes. My poverty is honest. Your house is a lie. The accusation struck him with blinding force, hitting the nerve of his deepest shame, the ruthless truth of his beginnings, the secret of the land deal. He saw the fire in her eyes, the passion that belied her quiet servitude, the moral clarity that saw straight through his wealth to his guarded, barren heart. He saw the woman who knew his soul better than any society belle ever could. He was suddenly consumed by a tidal wave of powerful, uncontrollable emotion, anger at her defiance, fear of her leaving, and a desperate, raw desire for the only honest, truthful thing he had found in his cold, calculating life. You speak of honesty, he whispered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, strained pitch. You speak of truth. Then tell me the truth of what you feel, Susanna. He closed the final, fatal distance between them. He did not wait for an answer. With a swift, powerful movement that stunned them both, he seized her face between his large, strong hands. His thumb brushed the soft skin of her cheek, a touch both possessive and trembling with contained tension. The proximity was devastating, filling the small space with the scent of his wool, his leather, and his sheer masculine heat. He lowered his head and took her mouth in a reckless, consuming kiss. It was a kiss of overwhelming force and desperation, not soft, not tender, but a savage claim that obliterated the walls of class and convention. It was the kiss of the lonely tycoon staking a primitive claim on the one thing he could not purchase. Susanna offered no resistance. She simply melted against him, the shock rendering her utterly helpless. All her fury, all her carefully contained tension, all the longing born in the lamplit kitchen rushed out of her, pouring into the brutal honesty of the moment. Her small hands instinctively clutched the lapels of his suit, holding onto him as if he were the only stable thing in a violently rocking world. The moment lasted an eternity, a searing admission of the forbidden, undeniable attraction that had simmered beneath their professionalism. Then, just as quickly, Jedidiah broke the connection. He drew back, his breath ragged, his grey eyes wide, revealing a flicker of shock and self-disgust. He had done the unforgivable. He had acted on impulse and compromised her. My God, Susanna, he choked out, his voice hoarse. I apologize, that was unforgivable, but you cannot leave. I will not allow you to return to hardship. He regained his composure with a visible effort, the tycoon snapping back into place, but the emotional damage was done. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing for a solution, a practical, wealthy solution, to fix the colossal mistake he had just made. Listen to me, he said, stepping back and putting a safer, crueler distance between them. I know your pride. I know you will not marry for money, and I cannot yet face the scandal of marrying one of my staff. But I can offer you safety, total security. I will set you up discreetly. A house, a generous allowance, absolute privacy. You will never have to work again, never have to worry, no one will know. You will be safe, I will be near, you will be my... He could not bring himself to use the word mistress. But Susanna understood perfectly. The white-hot intensity of the kiss was instantly replaced by an icy, searing comprehension. He had claimed her, then offered her an insult deeper than the debt collector's ridicule. She stepped back, her eyes wide with horror, the passion wiped clean by shame. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, Mr. Shaw. Think, Susanna, I am offering a permanent fortune. You are offering me a life built on an even deeper dishonesty," she cried, clutching her breast where his touch had left a burning mark. "You would keep me as a dark secret, a woman without honor. You have taken my dignity twice, Mr. Shaw, once with your pity and now with your lust." "I love your spirit," he insisted, reaching for her. No, you love the convenience of my silence. I refuse to be the sin you hide in the shadows." She turned swiftly, seized her small valise, and fled the room. She did not stop to retrieve the resignation letter or the despised ledgers. She flew down the service stairs, past the startled kitchen staff, and burst out the side door into the darkening Chicago street. She ran, not towards a destination, but away from the only man who had ever truly seen her soul, and the one who had just crushed her honor with the cruel offer of a gilded, secret life. She ran, clutching her valise, convinced that his kiss had not liberated her but had utterly contaminated her. She had escaped his mansion, but she was now hopelessly ruined. The late afternoon air of Chicago struck Susanna Croft with the cold shock of reality. Her flight from the mansion was not one of victory, but of sheer, desperate self-preservation. She held her valise to her chest, her heart still echoing the terrible thunder of Jedidiah Shaw's kiss and the crushing weight of his subsequent indecent offer. The memory of his hands on her face, the desperation in his eyes, and the final brutal insult of being offered a life as his hidden shame fueled her frantic steps. She had nowhere to go but back to the cramped, respectable boarding house where she had lived before her brief tenure at the Shaw estate. She knew the life awaiting her, endless toil, the stinging fumes of lie, and the constant nagging anxiety of making rent. Yet, it was an honest poverty, a life where her dignity, however fragile, belonged entirely to her. The descent back into the working class was immediate and harsh. Within days, Susanna's efforts to secure work were met with baffling, icy refusals. The laundries claimed they had no need of extra hands. The few seamstress shops she approached politely regretted their lack of space. She quickly realized the reach of the Gilded Age elite extended far beyond the mansions of the Gold Coast. Elias Van Dorn's quiet campaign of whispers had begun to take hold. The rumors, disseminated through the servants' network, fueled by Ainsworth's smug spite and the curiosity of the socialites, had painted Susanna as a woman of questionable virtue. The tale was simple and damning. The Tycoon, Jedidiah Shaw, a notorious widower, had installed a low-born paramour in his house before she was hastily dismissed for her impropriety. In the rigid morality of 1897, such a stain was indelible. No respectable employer dared hire a woman rumored to be a fallen woman. Susanna sat in her tiny rented room, the silence now a suffocating weight instead of a respite. Her meager savings dwindled. She felt the crushing irony. She had rejected Jedidiah's offer of a fortune to protect her honor, only to have her honor swiftly stripped away by the very society she sought to rejoin. She was trapped, ruined by the man she fled, yet unable to defend herself against the world he inhabited. Meanwhile, back in the lavish, sterile confines of his mansion, Jedidiah Shaw was a man tormented. His empire was running smoothly, but his focus was shattered. He found himself pacing his study, his eyes constantly drawn to the empty space where the resigned laundress should have been. The resignation letter still on his desk became a constant burning accusation. He cursed his pride, his lust, and his clumsy, cowardly offer to make her his mistress, the act that had driven her away. His emotional distress made him careless in business. He missed crucial market shifts. He grew irritable and erratic during meetings. This vulnerability was precisely what Elias Van Dorn had been waiting for. Van Dorn had successfully isolated his rival socially. Now he prepared the killstroke in the market. Van Dorn's chief operative, a shrewd lawyer named Henderson, presented his master with the final, damning evidence. It was a package of old notarized documents, the record of a land transaction from Jedidiah's early hungry years in Chicago. "The evidence is conclusive, Mr. Van Dorn," Henderson reported, his voice low with triumph. Shaw's fortune was built on fraudulent land acquisition involving the defunct Union Rail line. He used insider information to buy out an independent small investor, a man named Mr. Finch, at a rock-bottom price, claiming the land was worthless, then sold it months later for an enormous profit once the rail expansion was announced. Van Dorn smiled, a thin, cruel expression that rarely touched his eyes. So, our virtuous Tycoon is merely another robber baron built on the ruin of a smaller man. This is excellent. Not only does it expose his hypocrisy to the public, but the legal implications are disastrous. It could invalidate the land deeds for his main slaughterhouse operations. The dark secret was finally exposed. Jedidiah Shaw's vast wealth was fundamentally tainted. He was not merely ambitious, he was morally culpable for the ruin of another man. The act he committed to escape the very poverty that defined Susanna's life. The secret explained the crude, intense notes Susanna had observed in his old ledgers. The notes of a desperate man making a treacherous choice. Jedidiah's aide, a highly observant man who quietly respected Susanna's work ethic, caught wind of the escalating threat. He intercepted an ominous private telegram meant for Jedidiah, revealing that Van Dorn was preparing to file a massive, ruinous lawsuit based on historical land fraud. The aide, desperate to break through his master's emotional fog, marched into Jedidiah's study and slapped the telegram onto the desk. "Sir, this is beyond the markets. Van Dorn has the evidence. He's going to expose the Finch land deal. It could cost you everything, the stockyards, the rail lines, the foundation of your entire empire." The mention of the old transaction sobered Jedidiah instantly. The fear was cold and profound, cutting through his emotional preoccupation. He stared at the telegram, realizing the full scope of his vulnerability. The dark secret was loose. Then the aide delivered the second crushing blow. "And sir, I regret to inform you, the rumors regarding Mrs. Croft are widespread. She has been unable to find work. Van Dorn's people have ensured that every reputable establishment in the city believes she was your mistress and was disgraced. She is financially and socially ruined." The news was a sickening revelation. Jedidiah stared out the window at the distant smoky haze that marked the stockyards. The kingdom he had built on a treacherous foundation. He had saved Susanna from poverty only to subject her to a fate far worse. Social contamination. He had fought his whole life to be respectable, yet his own morally questionable past was about to destroy his fortune, while his reckless desire had destroyed the only woman he had ever truly admired. He stood up, his tall frame trembling, a storm brewing behind his cold grey eyes. He saw the full picture. Van Dorn had successfully used the shame of his past and the purity of the woman he loved as weapons against him. The paralysis of grief and confusion was over. Jedidiah Shaw, the man who clawed his way from nothing, snapped back into focus. He realized that the only way to save his empire was to fight Van Dorn in the only language the rival understood, power and ruthlessness. But the only way to save Susanna was to fight him with honor and truth. He made his decision. He would not hide. He would not surrender. He would confront his enemy and his own wicked past simultaneously. The time for whispering and hiding was over. The time for the final, public reckoning had arrived. The opulence of Elias Van Dorn's ballroom was suffocating, a testament to old money and social power. Venetian crystal chandeliers cast a glacial light over hundreds of Chicago's elite, all gathered for what was secretly the final crowning of Van Dorn's victory over his rival. Jedidiah Shaw entered the ballroom with the lethal precision of a predator. He was immaculate in his black tailcoat, but his grey eyes did not hold their usual coldness. They burned with a feverish, dangerous resolve. He was not a guest. He was a duelist, acutely aware that he was about to gamble everything, his empire and his chance at redemption. Van Dorn spotted him from the center of the room, where he preened near a cluster of powerful financiers. Van Dorn's smile was a study in polished scorn. He had telegraphed the news of his impending lawsuit to every person present, ensuring the stockyard tycoon was trapped both socially and financially. Jedidiah ignored the wall of hostile glances. He moved directly toward the orchestra stage, ignoring the light music. With an authoritative gesture that silenced even the guests' murmuring, he took the maestro's small silver hammer and tapped the pedestal. The ballroom plunged into a stunned silence. Every eye, including those of a shocked Van Dorn, turned toward the Tycoon. "I apologize for interrupting the music," Jedidiah began, his voice echoing with a force usually reserved for large conference halls. "But Mr. Van Dorn and I have business matters that, in my opinion, require the immediate attention of this select company." Van Dorn, recovering, advanced with a sneering smile. "Jedidiah, my dear fellow, what a surprise. You seem rather desperate. Have you come to confess your imminent bankruptcy before I need to expose your dubious business practices?" Jedidiah met the rival's gaze with a look of pure ice. "I did not come to confess weakness, Elias. I came to execute a final gambit. Tonight, you plan to destroy my reputation and my empire by using an ancient land transaction. You plan to reveal that I used insider information years ago to purchase the land of a small independent investor, a Mr. Finch, for a pittance, securing my initial capital." The public confession resonated like thunder. Murmurs erupted. Jedidiah Shaw had seemingly condemned himself. Van Dorn's face lit up with the pleasure of victory. Jedidiah raised his hand, demanding silence. "Yes," he admitted, looking coolly into the greedy eyes of the elite. "I did. I was a poor man, terrified of ruin, and I committed an act of pure ruthlessness to shield myself from the destitution that shamed me." He did not attempt to apologize, merely stating the fact in its cruel, naked truth. He waited for the shock to subside, then his gaze locked with Van Dorn's. "But you, Elias," Jedidiah continued, his voice heavy with disgust, "you, the man of old money, use this secret not for justice, but for theft. Your accomplice at this very moment is at the Chicago National Bank, attempting to liquidate your shares in the Western Rail, assuming I would be distracted by the scandal." Jedidiah smiled, a thin, unrelenting smile that promised ruin. "I am not as careless as you thought, Elias. Before coming to your party, my own agents had already bought up every floating title in the Chicago Western, and 30 seconds ago, with a simple telegram, I executed a massive buyout of all your assets on margin. You wagered that I would lose. You lost. You are financially ruined, Elias. Not by me, but by your own arrogance in underestimating me." The market triumph was overwhelming. Van Dorn staggered, his face white with disbelief, the whispers in the ballroom turning into a disorganized frenzy of shock. The financiers present swiftly realized Van Dorn had fallen, and Jedidiah Shaw had become the undisputed sovereign. But Jedidiah was not satisfied with financial revenge. His gaze swept over the ballroom, now filled with defeated hypocrites. "You are all satisfied with the blood and the gold," he declared, raising his voice above the chaos. "But there is another matter here, a matter of honor. While this man attacked me in the market, he used the vilest weapon of all. He attacked the character of a defenseless woman." Jedidiah spoke now not as a tycoon, but as a man seeking redemption. "You all heard the whispers. You laughed at the domestic consultant, the laundress, whom this rogue and his lackey Ainsworth accused of being my concubine, a woman of questionable virtue." The electricity in the room was almost unbearable. "I brought that woman into my house because in the face of all my wealth, she possessed the one thing I lacked, unshakable dignity and moral integrity," Jedidiah asserted, his voice vibrating with the intensity of a newfound conviction. "She saw me not as the great Tycoon, but as the frightened man I truly am. She rejected my wealth, and yes, she rejected my dishonorable attempt to keep her as my mistress." He paused dramatically. The silence was so profound you could hear the distant clinking of ice. "And that is why I am here tonight, not to protect my gold, but to protect her name. The price of my success is my own soiled past. The price of my redemption will be honesty regarding my future." At that moment, The side door to the ballroom opened discreetly. Jedidiah's aide, following urgent instructions, had ushered Susanna to the edge of the turmoil. She was modestly dressed, pale and wide-eyed with incomprehension, hearing every word. Jedidiah turned, his eyes fixed on the only woman in the room not wearing silk or diamonds, the only woman who could grant him forgiveness. He stepped down from the dais, crossing the vast Aubusson carpet, walking past the disgraced Van Dorn and the horrified Mrs. Alcott. He stopped before Susanna, who looked ready to faint. He took her hands, the working hands he had briefly touched in the library, the hands he respected more than any fortune. "Susanna Croft," he said, his voice losing the marked coldness and becoming hoarse with raw emotion. He did not kneel, for he would honor her with equality, but he bowed his powerful head. "I risked my empire, confessed my shame, and defeated my enemy. I did this to prove I can be worthy, not of your labor, but of your respect." He looked directly into her eyes, and then over his shoulder to the whole waiting society. "I love your honor more than my name. I love your soul more than my wealth. I want you to forgive me and teach me to be a better man. I ask you to marry me, Mrs. Croft, not in secret, but here, before all who dared to question your character. Marry me and help me pay the price of my success with true honor." Van Dorn's ballroom exploded into chaos. The sound of shock, outrage, and disbelief. The Tycoon, Jedidiah Shaw, had defied society, class, and the very concept of pedigree in a single, audacious, irrevocable act of love and redemption. He waited, trembling, for the only answer that mattered. The chaos that erupted in Elias Van Dorn's ballroom was a symphony of shattered glass, frantic whispers, and social collapse. But for Jedidiah Shaw and Susanna Croft, the entire world had narrowed to the small, sacred space between them. The murmurs of the elite, the rage of Van Dorn, the outrage of Mrs. Alcott faded into a distant buzz. Susanna looked up at the man who had just risked his immense fortune and revealed his greatest shame for the sole purpose of defending her name. His eyes, usually cold, were liquid with desperate hope. "Yes," Susanna whispered, the single word cutting through the noise. It was not a breathless romantic sigh, but a vow, firm, unwavering, and charged with the dignity she had fought so fiercely to protect. "Yes, I will marry you, Mr. Shaw. Not for your wealth, but for your courage to finally speak the truth." Jedidiah's powerful hands tightened around hers, a moment of profound, shared conviction that needed no kiss or public display. With a decisive turn, he led her out of the ballroom, leaving the panicked remnants of the Chicago elite to drown in the ruins of Van Dorn's market defeat and social disgrace. They did not return to the mansion. Jedidiah took Susanna to a small reserved hotel suite, where the gilded formality could be shed like unnecessary armor. Their conversation that night was not about wedding plans, but about expiation. "I lied to you," Jedidiah admitted, standing by the window, watching the city lights gleam, mirroring his restless ambition. "The truth of the land deal, it has always been the bitter root of my success. The poverty of that time made me cruel. I betrayed a man's trust, a man named Finch, to buy my safety." Susanna listened, calm and steady. "And the fear of that past made you offer me a dishonorable life, because you thought my virtue, like your old partner's land, had a price. But I do not want your apology, Jedidiah. I want your commitment. I want the man who spoke on that stage, the one who chose honor over empire, to be the foundation of our house." She did not demand the money be returned, but she demanded that the purpose of the money change. He agreed, realizing that her moral clarity was the only lens through which he could ever view his wealth without shame. The marriage that followed was as quiet and deliberate as their commitment. It was not held in the Shaw mansion, nor was it reported in the society pages. A magistrate married them in a small private ceremony, witnessed only by Jedidiah's most trusted and now thoroughly chastened aide, and a lone, sympathetic former maid who had respected Susanna's work ethic. The subsequent months were a period of profound transformation. The Shaw mansion, once a museum of loneliness, slowly began to exhale. Susanna did not change the decor. She changed the atmosphere. She eliminated the waste she had identified, not for saving money, but to eliminate the senseless extravagance that mocked the city's poverty. She insisted on simpler, higher-quality meals for the staff, ensuring no edible scrap was discarded. Ainsworth, the butler, initially maintained a chilling hauteur, but when he realized that Mrs. Shaw's orders were not arbitrary, but were based on superior logic and a deep, practical understanding of household economics, his disdain curdled into reluctant respect. She treated him with absolute fairness and unwavering formality, forcing him to accept her authority based on merit, not birthright. The true work, however, took place outside the mansion. Susanna had not married Jedidiah to become a society lady. She had married him to become his conscience. 6 months after the scandalous proposal, the city began to notice a peculiar shift in the operations of the Shaw meatpacking empire. Jedidiah announced an extensive program for his laborers: the construction of new sanitary housing near the stockyards, the implementation of safety standards that cut into profits, and the establishment of a fund for injured workers. The stockyard tycoon was not acting from charity. He was acting from necessity. Susanna was his silent, powerful partner. She used her knowledge of scarcity and hardship to design the new initiatives. Jedidiah would often find her late at night in his study, her hair pinned up, poring over blueprints for workers' tenements, or reading medical journals detailing the risks of the industrial environment. "The investment in safety will slow production," his lawyers warned. "The investment is not for production," Susanna would answer, her voice firm. "It is for stability. A man who works in decency works with pride. That is the only solid foundation for this company, Jedidiah." He watched her, his heart swelling with a fierce, protective tenderness. She had taken his tainted wealth and begun the arduous process of washing it clean. He had sought a wife for business stability. He had found a partner for moral survival. Their intimacy grew not through grand declarations, but through shared silence and deliberate touch. Often, Jedidiah would enter the study and find Susanna working. He would simply rest his large hand on the back of her neck, gently massaging the tension from her tired muscles. She would lean back into the immense, comforting weight of his presence. No words were needed. The touch was a silent communication. "I see your effort, I honor your purpose, and I am here." One evening, Susanna was working on her charitable ledgers when Jedidiah stood behind her, watching the lamplight catch the few faint freckles across her nose. "You have given me everything I needed, Susanna," he murmured, his voice low. "The respect of my peers is meaningless now. I have your respect. That is my true fortune." Susanna closed her ledger, turned, and stood before him, placing her palms flat against the fine wool of his waistcoat, right over his heart. "You have given me purpose, Jedidiah. That is a kind of wealth no one can steal." She paused, then walked to a small private cabinet built into the wall of his study, a place where they kept documents of the highest importance. She opened it and removed a small dark wooden frame, simple and unadorned. Set within the frame, carefully mounted on a clean piece of linen, were 8 worn copper coins. Jedidiah's breath caught. He looked from the frame to his wife, his throat tightening with emotion. "The original debt," he whispered. "The foundation of our destiny," Susanna confirmed. "The day I learned that my honor was priceless, and the day you learned that your wealth was not enough. They are here, in the heart of our house, to remind us both of the shame we escaped and the dignity we found together. She hung the frame precisely on the inside of the cabinet door. Jedidiah drew her into his arms, holding her close, not with the reckless demand of Chapter 5, but with the settled, profound comfort of a man finally truly home. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, a kiss that was a quiet, deep promise of partnership and devotion. In the roaring, extravagant heart of the American Gilded Age, the Tycoon had found that his true power lay not in the millions he commanded, but in the fierce, quiet courage of the laundress who had taught him the immeasurable price of honor. Their house was finally built, not on market speculation or social pretense, but on the true, unshakable bedrock of love. Chicago, 1907. The Shaw mansion no longer stood as a cold fortress of commerce. It had mellowed into a true home, softened by 10 years of shared life. Sunlight, rather than chandeliers, now dictated the mood of the grand hall, and the once sterile silence was frequently interrupted by the bright, chaotic energy of children. Jedidiah Shaw, now 48, retained the formidable bearing of the Tycoon, but the tension in his shoulders had eased into a confident calm. His grey eyes, still sharp, held a warmth reserved only for his family. His empire had only grown in the decade since the spectacular fall of Elias Van Dorn, but its growth was now measured not just in assets, but in the radical changes to industrial labor practices, all steered by the conscience he had married. Susanna had given him 2 sons, Henry, aged 8, and George, 6, both robust, loud reminders of the life he once feared he would never possess. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Jedidiah stood by the immense library window, watching his boys chase their mother across the vast lawn. Susanna, at 35, moved with the same tireless energy that had defined her as a laundress, though her dark woolen dress now bore the subtle, exquisite tailoring of a woman of means. The severe coiffure of her working years had softened. A few loose strands framed her face, catching the sunlight. The love between them had not merely survived the passage of time, it had deepened into an unwavering partnership. The passion born of the desperate kiss had matured into a profound, shared respect. They were an anomaly in Chicago society, a power couple whose wealth was driven by an uncompromising moral code. "You look far away, Mr. Shaw," Susanna said, coming up behind him, her hand naturally finding its place on his arm. "I was thinking of the irony, Mrs. Shaw," Jedidiah replied, covering her hand with his own. 10 years ago, I feared my past would destroy my future. Now it seems our future is defined by our past. The society itself had shifted, paying a heavy price for its rigidity. The old guard, represented by the disgraced Van Dorn, had slowly withered, their power diluted by the rising tide of progressives and the growing influence of Theodore Roosevelt's era. The era of the ruthless robber baron was waning, replaced by tycoons who understood that public image and social responsibility were the new currency. Jedidiah, with Susanna at his side, was recognized not merely for his wealth, but for his leadership in this change, a reputation his true peers valued far more than any old money endorsement. And Elias Van Dorn? He paid the ultimate price for his malice. His fortune lost to Jedidiah's final market coup, he was utterly ruined, his wife leaving him within months. He faded into an obscurity far crueler than poverty, becoming a ghost in the very society that once celebrated him. Susanna led Jedidiah away from the window, toward the small private cabinet in his study. She opened the door and gazed at the framed $8 still hanging there, their ultimate symbol. "Do you remember what you told me that night, Jedidiah, when you offered me security?" Susanna asked, her voice soft with nostalgia. "I said I loved your spirit," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the frame. "And I refused saying you loved the convenience of my silence. But you were wrong, and I was wrong. We did not love each other's convenience, we loved each other's truth. You gave me your truth that night, and I gave you mine by refusing your offer." Jedidiah turned to her, placing his strong, seasoned hands on her shoulders, "And the cost of that truth was worth every dollar I ever earned. You, my love, taught me that the only thing worth fighting for is the honor you cannot buy." He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that held the long, deep history of their sacrifice, their shared burden, and their triumphant, enduring love. It was a love built, not on silk and silver, but on the bedrock of dignity, and the shared memory of a handful of coppers scattered in the mud, a fate they had conquered together. What a magnificent journey through the heart of the American Gilded Age. The story of Jedidiah Shaw and Susanna Croft is more than just a tale of grand mansions and market dominance. It's a profound lesson on the true value of character. Jedidiah began with nothing, believing that wealth was the ultimate defense against shame. He amassed millions only to learn that his fortune was built on a lie, and that his true vulnerability lay not in his bank account, but in the emptiness of his own soul. He thought he needed a society wife for security, yet he found salvation in the woman who rejected his money. Susanna, in turn, showed us that honor is the only currency no one can steal. She was humiliated over a mere $8, but that single act of injustice became the catalyst for her destiny. She refused charity, rejected his lustful, dishonorable offer, and, in doing so, forced the most powerful man in Chicago to confront his own moral bankruptcy. Her fierce, quiet dignity stripped away his greed and replaced it with purpose. Their triumph wasn't just the wedding, it was the decade that followed, a testament to a love built on shared vulnerability and shared purpose. They proved that true power is not found in exploiting others, but in lifting them up, using wealth not as a shield for sin, but as a tool for justice. We invite you to reflect on this story of redemption and resolve. What was the most powerful moment for you? Was it the raw intensity of the reckless kiss, the cold betrayal of the dark secret, or the ultimate triumph of the final gambit when Jedidiah defended Susanna's honor before the horrified elite? Tell us what resonated most deeply, and if you stayed with us through all 8 chapters, from the poverty of the pawnshop to the triumph of the ballroom, please let us know. Write the word dignity in the comments below to show us you reached the very end, and to help more viewers discover this incredible tale of love and honor, we've got more compelling Gilded Age romances ready for you. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter.